You say fine. She asks if something's wrong, and you say fine. Not because nothing's wrong. Because fine is the fastest way to end a conversation you don't have the words for. You've been saying it for years, so many years now that she's stopped believing it, and honestly, some part of you has stopped believing it too. But you keep saying it, because the alternative, actually explaining what's going on inside you, feels harder than anything else you've done today, and you've done a lot today. Here's what nobody expects going into this. It isn't that you stopped loving her. It isn't that something happened. There was no affair, no fight that broke something, no single moment anyone could point to and say, there, that's when it started. That's actually the part that makes this so hard to talk about. If there had been a moment, you could fix the moment. Instead there's just a long, slow quiet that crept in over years, one skipped conversation at a time, until one day you realized you hadn't really talked, not actually talked, in longer than you want to admit. Most men your age were handed a very specific rulebook for what a husband is supposed to be. Provide. Fix things. Stay calm. Don't make the house harder to live in than it already is. Nobody handed you a rulebook for how to say I feel disconnected from you without it sounding like a complaint, or an accusation, or a problem you're dumping on someone who already has enough to carry. So you didn't learn that language. You learned the other one instead, the one where you handle things quietly and keep the peace, and somewhere along the way, keeping the peace started to mean keeping yourself out of the conversation entirely. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with this pattern, one that's different from just being tired at the end of a long day. It's the exhaustion of running two versions of yourself at once, for years, without ever putting either one down. There's the version that shows up for work, handles the mortgage, fixes the garage door, remembers the anniversary. And there's the version that actually feels things, worry, disappointment, a flicker of loneliness in a house full of people who love him, and that version almost never gets let out into daylight. Keeping that second version locked away isn't free. It costs something every single day, even when nobody around you can see the bill. Here's the turn most people don't see coming. This isn't a story about a man who checked out of his marriage. This is a story about a man who's still fully in it, still shows up, still does the work, still loves her, and has simply run out of a way to say any of that out loud that doesn't feel like exposing something he was never taught how to hand over. You're not absent. You're just translating everything you feel into actions instead of words, and she can't hear actions the way she can hear a sentence. Think about where you actually learned this. Maybe it was a father who came home from work, sat in his chair, and answered every question with a grunt that meant leave me alone, and you absorbed the lesson without anyone ever stating it directly. A man's inner life is his own business, and dragging it into the living room is a kind of weakness nobody respects. Maybe it wasn't even your father. Maybe it was a locker room, a job site, a barracks, some room full of other men where the same unwritten rule got reinforced 100 different times. Wherever it came from, you didn't invent this habit. You inherited it, the way you inherit an accent, without ever consciously choosing a single word of it. Think about what an actual evening looks like. She asks how your day was. You say fine, and you mean it, mostly, because nothing dramatic happened. But underneath fine there might be a low hum of worry about money, or a flash of something that happened at work that stung more than it should have, or just a tiredness you don't have a name for. None of that gets mentioned, not because you're hiding it, but because by the time you'd find the words for it, the moment's already passed, and starting it up again feels like more effort than it's worth. So you sit there, in the same room as her, fully present in body, and quietly absent in every other way that actually matters. There's a version of this that plays out almost every night in houses exactly like yours. Dinner happens. The television goes on, or the phones come out, and the evening dissolves into a kind of comfortable parallel existence, two people sharing a couch, a blanket, sometimes even a laugh at the same show, and still, underneath all of it, quietly starving for a conversation that never quite starts. Neither of you names it as starving. It just feels like Tuesday, then Wednesday, then a decade. This is where the real shift starts to happen, the one that turns quiet into something more dangerous. Silence is not neutral. It doesn't just sit there and wait. It fills in the empty space with a story, and the story is almost never flattering. When you go quiet night after night, she doesn't experience that silence as peace. She experiences it as a locked door, and eventually she stops knocking. Not because she stopped caring, because knocking on a door that never opens starts to feel like a waste of energy she doesn't have to spare either. Here's the twist inside the twist, the part that catches a lot of men off guard when they finally look at it straight on. You've told yourself, for years, that staying quiet was protecting her. Protecting the peace. Protecting the house from your bad moods, your worries, your complaints. But what you were actually doing was making a unilateral decision about what she could and couldn't handle, without ever asking her. You decided, alone, that your inner life was a burden she shouldn't have to carry, and you never gave her the chance to say otherwise. That's not protection. That's a wall built with good intentions and zero consultation. And here's where it gets more complicated, because this isn't only your pattern. Somewhere along the way, she probably adjusted too. She stopped asking the follow-up question, because fine was the answer every time, and asking a fourth time started to feel like pushing on something that clearly didn't want to open. So now you have two people, both quietly convinced they're respecting the other person's need for space, both slowly drifting into a marriage that runs on logistics instead of connection. Groceries. Schedules. Who's picking up which kid, or these days, who's calling which aging parent? The machinery of the household still runs perfectly. The actual marriage, the part where two people know each other's insides, has been quietly outsourced to silence. Here's a turning point most men never see until it's pointed out directly. The two of you haven't actually stopped communicating. You communicate constantly, about the mortgage, the in-laws, the leaking faucet, whose turn it is to call the plumber. What's disappeared isn't communication. It's disclosure. The difference matters more than it sounds like it should. Communication keeps a household running. Disclosure is what keeps two people actually known to each other, and you can have an enormous amount of the first while running almost entirely out of the second. There's a specific moment a lot of men can point to, if you push hard enough. Not a dramatic one. Usually something small. You're sitting across from her at dinner, and she says something about her day, and you realize, with a small cold drop in your stomach, that you can't actually remember the last time you told her something real about yours. Not logistics. Something real. And in that half second, you understand exactly how far the distance has grown, and exactly how long it's been since either of you tried to close it. Here's another layer worth sitting with, one that rarely gets said out loud in mixed company. Some of you aren't just avoiding the conversation because you don't have the words. You're avoiding it because some part of you suspects that if you actually started talking honestly, you might not like everything you'd hear yourself say. Maybe there's resentment under the quiet. Maybe there's grief for a version of the marriage that used to feel easier. Silence, in that sense, isn't just protecting her from your inner life. It's protecting you from having to look directly at it yourself. Here's a turn worth pausing on. A lot of men assume the fix for this is simply talking more. Say more words, more often, and the problem resolves itself. It's not quite that simple, and treating it that simply is part of why so many well-intentioned attempts at communicating more fizzle out within a week. The actual shift isn't about volume of words. It's about a single quality those words need to have that logistics conversations never require: risk. Telling her the plumber is coming Tuesday carries zero risk. Telling her you've been feeling like a stranger in your own house carries enormous risk, because now she knows something true about you that she could use to hurt you, comfort you, or simply see you differently. Real disclosure is always a small act of trust, and trust, once the muscle atrophies from disuse, takes deliberate reps to rebuild. This is the honest turning point, the one worth sitting with the longest. The danger here was never a big explosive fight. Fights, at least, are conversations. The real danger is the version of a marriage that never fights, never raises its voice, never has a bad night, because it also never has a real one. Two people quietly performing fine at each other, year after year, until fine is the entire relationship, and neither person quite knows how they got there or how to get back out. There's also a quieter cost to consider, one that shows up years down the road rather than tonight. Marriages that run on logistics instead of disclosure tend to survive just fine, right up until a real crisis arrives, a health scare, a job loss, a death in the family, and suddenly two people who haven't practiced real honesty in years are expected to lean on each other in the hardest moment of their lives. That's an unfair thing to ask of a skill nobody's kept in shape. The men who find it easiest to actually show up for their wives in a genuine crisis are usually the ones who never fully let the disclosure muscle go quiet in the calm years beforehand. Here's what almost nobody tells men in your position. Breaking this pattern doesn't require some big dramatic confession where you unload 20 years of unspoken feelings in one conversation. That's not realistic, and honestly, it would probably overwhelm both of you. What actually works is smaller and harder in a different way. It's saying, just once, actually, today wasn't fine, here's what happened, and then staying in the room while she responds, instead of retreating the second it starts to feel exposed. It's letting one real sentence out instead of the automatic one, and seeing that the house doesn't fall down when you do. The uncomfortable truth is that the silence you've been keeping to protect the marriage might actually be the thing slowly ending it, one quiet evening at a time. Not through a single dramatic failure, but through 1,000 small moments where the real version of you stayed in the other room while a polite, functional version sat down for dinner instead. The version of strength you were taught, stay calm, don't burden anyone, keep it together, was never wrong exactly. It just wasn't built for this particular job. Keeping a household running and keeping a marriage alive turned out to require two completely different skills, and you only ever got trained in one of them. There's still time to learn the other one. It starts small. It starts with one honest sentence instead of the word fine. It starts with letting her see the version of you that's actually a little tired, a little worried, a little more human than the one you've been presenting for years. That's not weakness. That's the only thing that actually rebuilds a bridge that silence quietly wore down. I'm Gray. And this is the Quiet 60s, where we talk about the things men in their 60s actually think about, but rarely say out loud. If this sounded familiar, leave a comment below. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's more of this coming.